Welcome back to Breaking Down Storage Tech. Today we're doing the part 2 of the set-based parallel unloader array 2.5 by Glotz, Hopper TR hash order, Rapscallion, and boyenn. So let's get straight into it. So in the first video I posted yesterday, we covered this bit. So we've prepped all our boxes to look something like this right here. Basically, we have a system or boxes that have at least 2 items in the first slot. So it'll be anything like this with any more items. This is just a really good exemplar box. So what happens here? Well, in this video, we're going to be breaking down the brain of the system and what is set-based logic. Now, if you want to know how this whole system runs, I did a pretty good explanation in the first video, but basically we want to keep, if I can find the chest right here, we want to keep in this chest right here, ignore these items, that'll be important later. We want to keep a log of every single of the first items we're unloading. So we want to keep a log of this piston, and then if we have another shulker box with a different item, we want to keep a log of whatever item that shulker box is unloading. And so that way we don't send the same in item twice, so that way we don't unload the same item at 2 times hopper speed because we're unloading it in 2 different slices, which will overflow our slice in our main storage. Now, how this works? Well, basically, we got input to this chest right here from the last video, so let's move on swiftly from there. So we have 2 hoppers right here. One of them will be on, one of them will be off or turned and locked at one time at any given time. Because this hopper is unlocked, it will go into this double chest right here. This redstone comparator will then output 2 main signals, one down this comparator and one down to this redstone dust. The one down this comparator is used in some logic, which I'll talk about in a second, but the one down the dust goes to this dust right here. This will then power this block, which does quite a few things. One of which is going down to this line to lock this hopper temporarily. But what it also does is powers this block right here, and actually powers this block right here to power this repeater through quasi connectivity to power this piston to move the redstone block over 1. This way, it unlocks the hopper and any items in here can fall through and continue the cycle. Now, there is a bit of logic here, especially in this part right here, which is when there is a item or quite a few items in this chest backed up. What it'll do is power all of this, and this is essentially just to unpower this and then repower this, so it basically kind of stays locked, and all of this stays locked. So we buffer all of the items in these 2 double chests instead of having them buffer in here, which could mess with some of the redstones and the timings, especially with sending them through these droppers right here. Now, there's also some more logic over here, which is to do what happens when it continues through, but we're talking about this right now. So the reason we have this right now is so that if we have any amount of items in these chests go over the total. So, okay, let me try that again. Basically, if the cumulative amount of shulker boxes stored in these chests is equal to 18, like there is in right here, which is done through subtracting both of their readouts to this 18 signal or 18 equivalent signal, it will then power this redstone torch because there will no longer be a signal going to this redstone torch. So what will happen is it'll update this entire chain right here to go 1 over, which will actually power this redstone wire right here to lock this dropper, or power this dropper to lock these 2 hoppers, so we lock the input. This is done so that way we get through all of these shulker boxes. Because how the system works is it's recursive, so it keeps going through the same shulker box, unloading the first item, then once we do is we send it back, go through the whole thing, unload the next item, send it back, unload the next item, until the whole box is empty and it's out of the system. But this system basically makes it so that instead of unloading 50 boxes for their first item, we unlock the first 18 for all of their items before trying anything else and adding new boxes to the system. And also, the other logic right here for why we're swapping all of these, or this redstone block back and forth, is so that we attempt to assign a box to a set and to a slice we try that for every single box before trying to repeat any boxes, so that way we don't have any cases where we're just repeating the same box over and over again until a slice gets empty. So that way we can make the maximum utilization of this unloader right here. And that's why we swap between sides. So what'll happen is it'll move to one side, and then it'll unload all the boxes in this chest right here while we're loading this chest up here from all the input. And then what'll happen is once this is unloaded, then we can unload this one. So that way it guarantees every box gets at least 1 shot at trying to fill it or take a slot in the unload. The items will then be moved down to this chest, while they're moved down to this hopper and pushed into this dropper right here. Now this is where there's a little bit of a sneaky comparator right here, which took me a second to find. Basically, this comparator will then read out when there's items in it and power this block right here, which powers all of these 3 dusts right here, to power this comparator and this repeater right here to lock this hopper, so that way the box can be run properly through the system. And we basically power with this repeater and this comparator right here. We shoot it into this dropper into this chest right here. Now, what happens then is once we have these chests right here, this is kind of a secondary buffer as well as all of the other buffers we have throughout. But this is done so that we cache the items and run them through the set assigning system. And it can be locked at will, so that way we have the proper timings. But what happens is we take the shulker box out into this hopper right here. Now this will lock the hopper through this comparator readout going to this line and target block right here to lock it until the item's been pulled to the next. And with the delay that there is, it'll stop any item from being interrupted while it's being assigned to a set or deassigned or recycled or whatever the outcome may be. Now it'll then move down to this dropper and into this dispenser right here. Now this is a really important sequence of events that's going to happen. Once it's in this dispenser, it will power this comparator to power this block right here and update this redstone wire right here. When you update this redstone wire, it'll power this block and unpower these 2 redstone torches. But note that it doesn't update these redstone or rails or these powered rails because it's still getting power from the comparator. Now, there will also be a signal going down this block right here to this repeater to power the dispenser to place the block. And because this hopper is available, it will take a singular item out. Now, this is where the important stuff happens. What happens is we also power this dropper right here through this block, which will cause these two, or this observer to observe that it's been powered, and then power this to power this block and power this piston to break the shulker box. Now, once the shulker box has been placed at this, because it's such quick succession, this comparator will depower, which will give the powered rails a short chance to unpower while there's no power coming from this comparator, and the torch is repowering because it takes 2 game ticks to repower. So this will temporarily turn off, which will be enough for this observer to realize an update, which will cause signals to go to this observer right here and this observer right here. Now, quite a few signals are done with this, but let's just talk about this signal over here for now, which goes to power this hopper right here. Now, when we power this hopper right here, this is done for a little bit to cause a little bit delay between the item going down this hopper and the item and the shulker box going through here. So that way we don't have, or we can adjust the timings as so. Now let's talk about the item's path for a little bit. So it makes its way into this dropper right here. And this dropper will be powered at the precise timing using the same power that is used for this piston, because this observer right here will power this block and power this piston as well as this dropper right here, which will shoot it into this dropper under it. This is going to be a little bit complex, but basically when the item gets into this dropper right here, what will happen is it'll power this comparator. This comparator will then power this block and power this redstone wire right here to power this target block. Now when it powers this target block, it will unpower this redstone torch, which will allow this hopper to unlock and push its item into this dropper right here. When it's in this dropper, what will happen is this comparator will unpower, allowing this redstone wire to also unpower, updating this dropper because it's no longer powered from that redstone wire, which causes a super short burst of this observer updating, powering this block, which will power this note block to power this sticky piston. But then because it's moving with the block right here, the power gets cut off. So it's a very short, and that signal right there is not too important. That's more important for the removing an item from the set base when it combines with this piston right here, but that's just good to know. What also happens is this comparator will no longer be powered because this white stained glass is no longer in the item, like we just talked about for this signal right here. But it also causes no more power to go to this redstone wire and this redstone torch, which causes a really short burst of where this trapdoor can flip up and then back down super fast. And what this causes is an update in this observer right here, because the scaffolding will go from having nothing underneath it apart from this trapdoor, but it doesn't count that, to having something under it. And what will cause that to happen is this observer to update, which will then power this block to power this note block as well as this rail right here. But the important thing is it powers this dropper to reset the system as it was before. And then this rail is then used to go all the way down here. As you can see, it does quite a few signals. One of them being this observer right here, which is watching it to power this block and power this dropper right here to shoot it into this hopper right here. Now, what also happens is there's a signal going down this observer line to power all of this observer line, which goes down to this signal, and we'll talk about that in a second. Now, once it's under in this hopper right here, what happens is that rail goes to this observer right here, which goes down this observer line. Now, one of these signals is super important because it goes to this observer to power this block right here and power this redstone wire, which goes to this line right here, as well as this block, which goes to this line to power this comparator right here. Now, when it powers this comparator right here, what happens is it cancels out its signal because it's a stronger signal. So it'll remove the power coming to this redstone wire right here, and only this one, because this wire is coming from this comparator. So because it's only a signal strength 1 coming from this composter, it won't overflow into the other lines. So that unlocks this hopper, as you can see right here, underneath this chest, which will allow it to pull an item if it can. Now, in this case, because there's no previous items of like the piston in the set, like right here, it will not be able to pull any item. Now, what happens then is there is this comparator output coming from this hopper, which is just like your regular SSI filter. Because of the filter way it's set up, it will power this redstone wire when a single item gets into it, which removes the power going to this comparator because it's only getting power of 1 and -1 is 0. So it will unlock this hopper underneath it. So the item will be able to flow down all the way into here. What happens then is now that it's in this hopper, this repeater is actually locking this bottom hopper, so it'll be forced to come into this dropper line right here. Now this is where this rail line signals become also really important again. So we have the power going to this observer right here, as well as this observer, which is watching this dropper, which gets powered from the direct rail line. So we power these two droppers right here to shoot it up into this one right here, which also receives power from the rail line itself, as well as this observer to go into here. And this last one gets powered by this observer coming down from this observer line, which gets updated from when the whole system gets powered from that initial pulse, if I can find it. Yes, so from when this observer updates, because when this line gets removed, it will update this redstone repeater, which will power this observer to power this block and power this node block right here. Also run this observer line to quasi-connectivity power this dropper to shoot it into the set. And it also goes down to power this rail line right here. I was actually mistaken. It does not power it from based on this rail line. Sorry about that. So what happens when the item makes it into this hopper right here? Well, it actually gets unlocked, and this is coming from the original signal, which comes from this rail line right here that we were talking about earlier. So it powers this observer, which updates this rail line right here to update quite a few observers. The main one being this observer right here to power this block right here. Now this sends a couple signals, but the main one we're worried about is to go to this redstone wire right here to power this comparator. Now, because it's in compare mode and this is getting a full strength signal, it will go to 0. And this will turn only this redstone wire to 0 compared to both of them. And you don't have to worry about this one overpowering it, going and powering both of the hoppers, because these are only signal strength ones coming from each individual one. So there's no overflow into any of the other blocks. So this this redstone dust will no longer be powered. So it unlocks this hopper. And in this case, that there's no items in the set that match it, it will only be that one singular item in the hopper. Now, just like in an SSI filter, we have a comparator coming out from this hopper, which powers 2 redstone dust. And now that a single item has been added to the count, this dust will now power, and it'll go to this comparator in subtract mode. So because 1 - 1 coming from this composter and the 1 redstone signal coming from this redstone dust, it'll turn off, unlocking the hopper underneath it, which will allow the item to flow down, and then it goes down into this hopper because it's not locked. Now, What then happens is it flows into this dropper right here, and this is where these other signals become kind of important. So if you remember, this signal right here, well, because it turned to 0, it will actually unpower this repeater right here, which powers this observer to power this block and power this note block right here. Now we have a few signals, but it goes to power this line right here through this observers, which update this or power this dropper, but that's the last dropper. What about all the other droppers? Well, this note block right here powers this observer right here, which will update this entire rail line to power, and which will also update this observer right here, and it'll power this dropper right here to power or update this observer which is watching it. So it'll power these two droppers right here, as you can see, this dropper and this dropper coming from this observer and this observer. This dropper right here just gets powered from the same observer just that powers the one beneath it, so it forces it into this top one, and that's when we come back to this last signal that we just talked about to shoot the item into this chest right here. Now, that's how we assigned an item to the set, and what that will cause it to happen is, if I go like this, what happens is we've just taken the first item out and put the item in here. Now you may say, what happens to the box? Well, this is where the other set of signals come in. So we have the hopper right here, which will pick up the box once it gets pushed and broken and shove it into this dropper right here. Now, this dropper will get powered from this note block coming from the signal we talked about previously, which is coming from this observer, which will power it down into this dropper right here. And this will then get powered by this redstone rail that we talked about, coming all the way from this main redstone rail line, which will update this observer to update or power this repeater to update this observer to power this block and power this dropper right here, which then goes into this dropper right here, which then immediately gets pulled out into this hopper right here. The shulker box will then make its way into this hopper right here, where it gets pushed down into this dispenser. Now, this is where a super long signal, if you just look at the path that I'm going to show you right here, is this main or this secondary rail line that we talked about earlier goes to power or update this observer, which powers this block, powers this no block, updates this observer, which then subtracts from this comparator to unlock this repeater to unlock this hopper right here, like we talked about previously, but the item has already made its way into the dropper. Now, we also have a observer reading out from that. Now, what happens is then it updates this observer to power this block, power this no block, update this observer to update this observer to power this block to power this rail line. Now, what happens then is these observers get updated, which powers this dropper and then powers this dropper through quasi-connectivity, as well as powering this observer to power this repeater to power this dispenser to place the shulker box. Now, don't worry about those two droppers firing. That's important for the when there's an item that's already in the set and we need to recycle the box. But what happens then is this piston then gets updated through this observer line, which comes from the powering and locking of this hopper coming from this repeater line that we just talked about. So it pretty much breaks it very instantly. And then this shulker box then goes down into this hopper right here and then continues down into this dropper. And because there's no power going to this hopper, it's actually unlocked, allowing the item to flow down to this dropper right here. So to talk about how it goes through this huge dropper line, we gotta look back to this observer right here, because there's also an observer coming right here and that powers this piston, but it will also update this huge observer line. And it also powers this powered rail line to power this observer right here to power this note block and power this dispenser, which I'll talk about in a second. But what it also does is run this huge observer line to do the same trick we did over here to power the block, which then causes the piston to power and then retract. So it's a pretty good system for only getting one observer input or output, or one output from the observer, which updates this powered rail line. And how powered rails work is they actually, in the subtick, they power the last rail line before powering the first one closest to the power source. So it'll actually activate like this. So it updates these three observers to power this dropper, this dropper, this dropper, this dropper, and then this dropper, and because it powers this rail line, it'll power this dropper to go into this one of these droppers right here. It doesn't really matter. Now, this is where this other signal comes from. So when this power to this note block happens, it'll either power this dispenser or cause it to retract. It doesn't really matter, but that'll update this huge water elevator because it'll either be bubbled or not bubbled. And this will update all of these observers right here, which goes up this huge dropper tower. And because this is happening really instantaneously, it's basically an instant dropper line. And the power also gets read by all of these observers right here to run all of these last droppers right here to finally go into this chest right here. This is normally a double chest, but I cut it off so that way the system doesn't run while I'm testing. And that's how we assign an item to the set. Now, as you can see right here, we have the item in the set. So what happens if we try and run the same item through the set? Well, the whole initial process will be pretty much the same until we get to here. Or actually, it'll be even up to here. The box will get placed as normal and it'll go down here, and it'll pretty much be the same until it gets to right here, this hopper right here. And what happens here is that because it's the same item in this set right here, we have another piston, and this will cause the piston to get pulled down into this hopper. So there's a stack of 2, and because we have a SSI filter right here, this will stay unlocked for longer. And what we do with the first piston is we actually just run it through the set as normal, as if we were assigning it. So it'll run through the whole line we just talked about, but don't worry about the shulker box for now. Basically, it goes up this huge the dropper tower and gets placed into here. But now we have to worry about the unlocking of this line right here, coming from this observer line all the way from here. So when this powers and updates all of this, it'll go into this comparator in compare mode, which will unpower this hopper right here. And when this is unpowered, this will be conveniently at the same time that the second item makes its way through all of these hoppers, which will cause it to, instead of go to this dropper right here, to actually get pulled down, because hoppers prefer to pull than push. Now, this will then allow the hopper to, or the item to go into this hopper right here and run into this dropper line and go into this slot right here. Now, what we talked about before with these double firing of these droppers that I told you not to worry about until this part of the video right now actually. Well, we actually place the box and shoot the item back in it, so it returns back to whatever the full box state was, or the previous box state. And now we actually break it, but there is another signal to worry about now, and that is the signal coming from here. So when the item was placed in this dropper, it actually updates this comparator to power this repeater right here. Now, this will update a different signal, because this observer will update this observer to power this repeater and power this piston to move this gray concrete out of the way, so that way this signal doesn't actually run the huge dropper line. But instead, we also have another signal with this observer running all of this to power these 2 blocks right here. The power in the bottom block is to lock this hopper, so when the shulker box gets broken and pushed into this dropper right here through this hopper, it doesn't get shot down this line, and it stays in this dropper long enough for when this block powers, which will power this dropper and shoot it down this water stream and go all the way up and be recycled. I put ice here to block it so it doesn't run through, but it runs into the beginning of the system. And yeah, that is how we assign and make sure only one item is being filtered at a time. But what happens when that item is no longer being sorted? Well, because of the way the slice is designed, it will emit or shoot out the last item in that slice through one of these droppers right here. And this will then go down into this line right here and down here, go up this water stream. What happens here is the item will be pushed into this hopper because it's going through this water stream. And what happens is, because the soul sand hitbox is slightly less than that of water, it will be able to go down into this hopper and go down into this dropper right here, which will then power this block and power this redstone line as well as this redstone line. So it will run the same sequence with all of this weird piston goodness that we've talked about previously, with one major difference: the fact that it powers this block to power this note block and extend this piston to move this trapdoor here. So when this observer signal fires, it will connect the trapdoor to this white stained glass pane to update this observer right here, which then will power this block right here to update or power this white stained glass pane, as well as powering this block to shoot the dropper that the shulker or the item was in, into this hopper right here. And it will power this iron trapdoor to connect to this white stained glass to update these 2 observers. Now, this observer will go here to power this redstone wire directly to unlock this slice, the same as we saw on the other slice, but it will also send a signal to this dust right here to run this repeater to keep it alive slightly longer. But there's one key detail, and that is what happens is that this line that we talked about previously, where this gets powered to power this huge rail line, also actually happens because we're running the same signal. So that unlocks this hopper right here, and this is where these weird item layout comes from, because we have blockers here for this specific purpose, because we actually unlock both hoppers underneath it. then we get rid of the piston because it stacks with this piston, and we get rid of the first item right here. And this first item will actually just run through the whole system, because it's only a singular item because of the way we activate it and only one gets pulled out. It'll just run through the system as if we were assigning the item. So nothing to worry about there. But the piston, on the other hand, will run down here and run down into this piston, or this hopper right here. And this will get unlocked because of the system right here that we talked about, which is the same on the other side. So it can run down into this hopper right here. When it gets into this hopper, it will go into this dropper right here, where you have this comparator to power this block and power this redstone wire to power the block and power this note block to power this dropper and shoot out the item. Now this will happen for both items because there will be a slight delay because of the way the hopper is locked and things like that, but not to worry. So what then happens is the item gets shot out and then go down this water stream right here to eventually end up at your main storage output. So that's how we get rid of the last items from the storage system and how we can start running it. Now there's a bit of logic around this, like when we have this set full, that's where this stuff comes into play. Because when this is full, and we count that with these counters as well, so that way when there is no more slices, so when there's 16 items in here, so apart from these ones, so 16 extra items, the signal strength would be long enough to overpower the subtraction from here to power this repeater right here to power this block right here, which will power this redstone line, as well as this comparator right here. And what happens is it powers this sticky piston to move this slime block up to stop any incoming signals by moving all of this up, and basically moving this gray concrete here to power this repeater, to power this block, to power this redstone wire, to lock this hopper. Now, similar signals come from this system, right, or this internal system, to cause a little bit of delay between the things, but this will basically hard lock it, and so any box that gets sent through here will just get stuck in this chest while the system is locked. And we also have a secondary input to come through here, which comes from the pause switch, which does essentially the same thing and just stores all the chests right here, or all the shulker boxes right here. And that's basically it. And now we have a bunch of prime chests to be unsorted in our array, waiting in this chest right here. And if you want to see that, make sure to stick around to tomorrow's video, so you can actually see how we unload the first item in every single one of our shulker boxes really consistently and get out all the last item to send to the system to undo it from the slice. But apart from that, thank you for watching.